it's not quite a global recession, but the world economy, especially trade, is not doing so well. The latest figures from Euler Hermes show global trade is set to grow at its slowest pace in a decade this year, just 1.5%. And 2020 is unlikely to be any better, with just 1.7% growth in global trade next year. In the mix here are factors such as the US-China trade feud, rising protectionism and higher tariffs. Let's unpack this then and its implications for players such as South Africa and the African continent. I'm joined in studio by Morawitz, who is Head of Information and Grading at Euler Hermes, South Africa. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you for having me.
So it is concerning, isn't it? I mean, the last time we dealt with such slow growth in global trade, and global trade, I take it as one of the pulse indicators of the state of the global economy, was just before the recession in 2008, and this is the slowest it has grown since then. What does this tell us about the global economy?
Yeah, it is rather concerning. Unfortunate, I might add that two of the largest economies have decided to go down this path. I think economies obviously operate in cycles, and I think most economists would probably agree that we are primed for some sort of recession at this point in time. I think the trade feud that's currently ongoing is only exacerbating the problem and making it come a little bit quicker.
Talk to me about sectors, right? Because in terms of trade, we're talking goods and services. You know, the high seas and all those container shipments crisscrossing the high seas for various destinations. What sectors are a factor in this poor performance in terms of growth in global trade?
From a South African point of view, we're obviously a very commodity-based economy. Mining is one of the major sectors. Unfortunately, due to the slowdown in Germany, which is obviously a very large vehicle manufacturer, our second largest trade partner in terms of exports, the slowdown in the motor vehicle sector has obviously knocked the South African OEM manufacturers. And then I think outside of that, it's just the general sluggish economy that we've obviously had to contend with. Going forward, I think in 2020 we are forecasting that machinery and equipment, the likes of commodities, the iron ores, coals, steels, and then obviously IT technology, rather electronics, semiconductors will obviously also slow down. A marginal improvement in terms of agri-food, chemicals, and then IT and software sector specifically.
So just a final point on the South African aspect of it then. This doesn't bode well for our country, does it? I mean, seeking growth, at the last estimation was that by the Reserve Bank that the economy this year is to grow by 0.5%. And basically we are seeking to constantly have a trade surplus where we are exporting more than we are importing. At this point, this doesn't bode well for us.
No, not necessarily. Unfortunately, I think there's the African proverb that when elephants fight, the grass gets stamped. We are unfortunately on the periphery of global trade. We are not a particularly large economy in the global scene. The two larger, the United States and China, have obviously seen their respective economies slow down. There has been a diversion of trade to smaller economies, though, so there have been some winners in terms of maybe manufacturing been moved from China to smaller regional economies, the likes of a Vietnam or a Thailand, for example. I think, unfortunately, South Africa is just one of the casualties. What it is that we produce because of the slowdown is obviously not in demand anymore, or not in demand as much as it was in the past.
So finally, look then globally, what are the trends we are looking at? A rising protectionism, the rules of the World Trade Organization that took decades to negotiate are being tossed to the side?
Pretty much, yeah. I think if you look at the overall, the narrative that I think is being portrayed by the United States, there does seem to be a move away from globalization and more towards a more protectionist state. Again, I use the example of Vietnam. A lot of trade that was initially coming out of China has now been moved to that smaller economy, and they've done very well. They've moved their trade surplus with the United States up to, I think, just shy of Germany, which is fantastic for that small economy. But the Americans are now obviously targeting them because of that surplus again. So, yeah, there are opportunities. I think if we are smart, we just need to look for the correct trade partners and develop those relationships. There are obviously, no one wins in the event of a trade war.
Yeah.
And as we've stated in the report, there is, at this point in time, a trade feud. Hopefully, cool heads prevail and we can step it back to a trade truce. I think if that happens, the economy will hopefully start recovering, not necessarily going back to where it was in the past, but maybe just stabilize and give us a little bit of hope for the future.
Right, look, thank you so much. I like that, ending with a message of hope and basically the best case scenarios. Of course, there's a lot of uncertainty also with Brexit, also in the mix there still to come. What will be the impact thereof in global trade? That's Luke Morawitz of Euler Hermes, South Africa, joining us here to talk about the state of global trade. Let me move